We knew that Donald Trump had made a pitch for Ukraine's critical mineral resources, a pitch that was entirely consistent with the idea that he would be able to justify a future possible decision, should negotiations with Putin not go to plan, to continue support. But we had no idea of the real scale of that pitch. Today, the Telegraph newspaper unveiled the terms of a draft contract Trump had sent to Zelensky, and it is breathtaking. Beyond anything you could have imagined. No wonder Zelensky has said that Ukraine rejected the pitch. Here is what the draft covered. First, it says that the US and Ukraine should form a joint investment fund to ensure that, quote, hostile parties to the conflict do not benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. So far, so good. The agreement to be governed by New York law, which I guess you would probably want to look at carefully if you were Ukraine, but fine. Then we get to the pointy end. The US will take 50% of recurring revenues received by Ukraine from extraction of resources and 50% of the financial value of all new licenses issued to third parties for the future monetization of resources. There will be a lien on revenues in favor of the US, which means that the US gets paid first, so any shortfalls or issues are someone else's problem. It also states that for all future licenses, the US will have a right of first refusal for the purchase of exportable minerals. This is an extraordinary wealth grab. This isn't saying the US has given valuable support, so should have a protected part in the benefits of reconstructing Ukraine, which would be fair comment. It's saying we own you. Everything we gave you, we are declaring retrospectively to have been a loan, and you will not just pay us back, but you will impoverish yourself to our benefit in perpetuity. These are, as the generally Trump-friendly Telegraph pointed out, the sort of terms historically imposed on aggressor states defeated in war. They are worse than the financial penalties imposed on Germany and Japan after their defeat in 1945. Indeed, they would mean the transfer of a higher share of Ukrainian GDP than the reparations imposed on Germany at the Versailles Treaty. The burden so severe that the resentments at its imposition fed the progress of the Second World War. Not only would Trump extract vast wealth from Ukraine, he would at the same time, by the way, let Russia off the hook entirely. Trump hadn't disclosed these terms publicly when he'd been speaking about it, but he had laced his comments with subtle threats about what might happen if they weren't accepted. So he told Fox News this.
You know, they may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, but we're going to have all this money in there, and I say I want it back.
At the Munich Security Conference, where the exact terms were not yet public, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham explained the offer in broadly the same terms that I suggested on this channel at the time, that it was, in his words, a clever ploy to bolster declining popular support for the Ukrainian cause. He suggested the Europeans should root hard for the idea because it would lock Washington into defending a future settlement. While that discussion was going on, Ukrainian officials were talking up hopes that such a deal could be done in principle, while secretly knowing that this draft existed and could only be agreed to by someone who had utterly lost leave of their senses. One of the challenges is that there is a lot of loose talk about how much Ukraine's resource wealth is actually worth. A totally make-believe figure of $26 trillion has been circulating. Now, Ukraine has probably the largest lithium store in Europe, but lithium prices have plunged 88% since 2022. And the United States already has the largest reserves on the planet, with 40 million metric tons in Nevada. Ukraine also has some rare earth minerals. It has cobalt, for instance, which used to be essential for EV batteries, but they've now mostly moved towards using lithium ferrous phosphate. No longer need cobalt. There are valuable reserves, have no doubt, maybe to about half the figure of those fantasy figures, which is still, rather substantial. So you're left with two takeaways on this. One, on a purely practical level, Ukraine could not possibly meet Trump's headline $500 billion demand. And two, on a very basic moral level, because even in realpolitik terms, we have some standards. It is hardly acceptable to treat a victim nation which has held off an invading force for 3 years in the name of preventing autocracies from simply grabbing the territory of their neighbours. Add to that the fact that Europe has supported Ukraine equally much, and the European Union had already struck a partnership to cooperate with Ukraine to develop resources, which obviously would be completely cut across if Trump got his way for a right of first refusal on all deposits. Former British diplomat Ian Bond told the Telegraph, Trump basically appears to be acting as though the Americans have the right to seize Ukraine's national assets in return for the assistance that they have given so far. He is making a petty criminal's play, like coming into a shop and saying, "Nice little business you've got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it." It is an administration which is behaving like an organised crime syndicate. This conflict, of course, represents the competitive shift that's taking place geopolitically between the United States and Europe. Both countries are looking to secure supplies of critical minerals that are not in the control of China. Ukraine's lithium supply is relatively insignificant to the US, thanks to its own hoard already mentioned and the major supplies in nearby Chile. But in the European context, it is clearly more significant. So this could become a point of major contention. By the way, significant amounts of those Ukrainian resources are in areas currently controlled by Russia, so that's also an issue depending on the terms of any peace agreement. While this was being revealed, of course, US and Russian representatives were sitting down in Riyadh for the first round of talks between the two great powers. As flagged in my video last week, the agenda for these talks was wider than just Ukraine and is really about the full wish list for each country for their ambitions in the world over the coming, 4 years stroke decade, depending which one you're looking at. Much of what was discussed will probably not be made public, but the Russians certainly made no secret of their interest in the US normalizing relations with Russia, which they said would allow Western oil and gas companies to share in the extraction and sale of Russia's energy resources, which of course would benefit American businesses considerably. And so it is that the stage is set. Trump is interested in a deal that benefits the United States the most. If he was going to resist the benefits of what Russia can offer him, then he figured it would have to be the sort of massive wealth transfer from Ukraine that he put to Zelensky. Maybe he put that on the table because he thought Ukraine has its back to the wall and it has no choice. The dishonour of such a move wouldn't bother him overly, at least to all appearances. Or maybe it was the opening highball pitch for a negotiation with Ukraine that would come in eventually at a lower commitment, but sufficient to give him the option to play hardball with Russia, making it clear that, as a deal maker would always want, he has the power to walk away from the table if he doesn't get the deal that he likes. Either way, nothing could have more starkly illustrated Ukraine's predicament in this version of the endgame, where it could face a classic case of heads you win, tails I lose. Be defeated and be plundered by Russia, or achieve peace and be plundered by Trump. Now, at the same time as all this is going on, European countries have been holding emergency summits to discuss how they can possibly play their hand, given this recent turn of events. On the table, the following questions. If America walks away from Ukraine, can Europe fill the gap that it will leave? If America walks away from Ukraine, should Europe fill that gap even if it could just about manage to? Or does it need to be looking instead to its own defence vulnerabilities with a view to what Russia might do next? And come to that, and I don't know that this question will be on the table, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't being discussed in the bars and over dinner. Is Europe facing a time imminently when the United States will not only stop being a reliable ally for Europe, but will become an actual adversary? And how on earth does Europe, with its boisterous mismatch of cultures and states, respond coherently and smartly should that come about? Those are the discussions going on right now. I, for one, am not expecting they will be announcing breakthroughs anytime soon, possibly anytime ever, to be honest. We've seen the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, making statements about how any Ukrainian peace deal will require a United States backstop to deter Russia from attacking again, and that having committed the UK to providing contributing forces to any such peacekeeping force in Ukraine post-agreement, he will be jetting off to the United States in a few days to discuss all of this with Donald Trump. Maybe he knows something I don't, but kind of looks to me at first glance that he and the other European leaders really still haven't absorbed how profound a change in US positioning has just taken place, and what that means for what happens next. We'll see, but personally I would seek to remember that it's only in cartoons where, so long as you don't look down, gravity won't kick in.